Hi, my name is Savenia Falquist and I'm with Henderson House, and we're excited to be here to share what we do in Yamhill County for survivors and victims of sexual assault and domestic violence.
Hi, I'm Julie Siepmann and I'm here from Juliette's House. Looking forward to having an opportunity to talk about the role that Juliette's House plays in our community in terms of intervening in situations of suspected child abuse, as well as the prevention programs that we offer.
Hi, I'm Debra Bridges, and I'm excited to be here for Evergreen Ideas. I'm with the Yamhill County District Attorney's Crime Victims Office, and I'm here to talk about the impacts of violence against women and children in our community.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the next installment of Evergreen Ideas. My name is Molly Lord Gerritsen. I am the founder and director of Peace Valley School. I'm excited to be here today working with Evergreen Aviation Museum's Education Department to continue a lecture series that we started in the hopes of bringing community around to talk to our local experts about what we're doing. Today, the topic is Yes, All Women, and the three amazing speakers we have are all superheroes in our community that work together to make the world better, to make the world safer for victims and their families here in Yamhill County. The first speaker will be Debra Bridges.
Thank you. And thank you to the Peace Valley School for inviting us here today. My name is Debra Bridges, and I'm the director of the Yamhill County District Attorney's Crime Victims Office. In Oregon, every county, so every 36 counties, has a district attorney's office that prosecutes crimes in their community. Within those offices is a crime victims office, and their sole responsibility is to offer services to victims of crime. So I'm going to talk to you about what we do in Yamhill County and how we do things just a little bit differently than other counties, but to talk to you about what we feel is a commitment to our victims and their families in Yamhill County. So Brad Berry is the Yamhill County District Attorney, and he really sets the tone for how we treat victims in our community. And our Crime Victim Services Department is responsible for offering services to all victims of crime within our Yamhill County borders. But most specifically, he has a very strong commitment to domestic and sexual violence against all members of our community. And we have specialized prosecutors who work on domestic violence cases, and we have a very vigorous crime victims office, of which I'm the manager. And I'm going to speak to you a little bit about the work we do. So in Yamhill County, we have a relatively small office. We have 4 advocates who offer 24 hours, 7 days a week response to crime victims in our community. So our office works with law enforcement agencies throughout the community, and we will go out in the evenings, whatever time of day, to hospitals and to the police departments to meet victims of crime wherever they are. So it may be that we are going to the hospital and helping victims navigate a sexual assault exam. We might be going to a hospital because there's a child who has an acute child abuse situation. So those are things that we find very important in Yamhill County, is that we are meeting victims right away so that we can help shepherd them through a very confusing criminal justice system. Most people have a familiarity with the criminal justice system based on TV, so you may like to watch the shows that a lot of people do, crime-related shows, and I do too. Although I'm probably the worst person to watch them with, because I'm always like, well, that's not how that happens. They would never do that. Or I'm, solving the crime well before the end of the show. So one of the challenges we have, though, with that, because those shows are so popular, is that our victims and their families come to us with what they think is a great knowledge of a criminal justice system that doesn't exist. So some of the things and our responsibilities is to help them understand the realities of a very complicated criminal justice system and to adjust their expectations for how quickly cases can be solved, what types of technologies we might have that solve these cases. And we really have to help inform our victims and their support system about how these systems work. And it's important, critical work, but what's a challenge to us is that we're all working with people who are experiencing trauma. And so when you're experiencing trauma, it is very hard to track information. So the reason of having an entire department that's solely responsible for working with crime victims is really important. And it was probably about 30 years ago when the movement for supporting crime victims really gained some traction. And now in Oregon, we have constitutional rights for victims. We have lots of statutory rights that are applied. And so think back to 30 years ago, somebody may have been a victim of a crime and they wouldn't have been able to be in the courtroom during a trial. Their consideration for what they want to see happen as a result of the crime wouldn't happen. So we've really made some huge strides on behalf of all crime victims, but what we all overwhelmingly see is victimization against women and children. So I will be speaking a little bit about that. So a crime will happen in our community, and law enforcement will call us to say, could you please come support a woman or a child or a man because they're a victim of domestic violence or sexual assault, and we'll either report to a police department or to the hospital. And that is our very first introduction to that individual and our very first opportunity to impart some healing and some hope into a situation that somebody's just experienced. Our job is to help them understand what their options are, what rights they have as victims, and then to help be a voice for them in a system that sometimes people are intimidated by either law enforcement or even a prosecutor's office, and very much a court system. Victims have some rights. The biggest rights that they have are dignity and respect, and those are rights that are in the Oregon Constitution. And really, we feel very committed to making sure that victims' dignity and respect is adhered to. And so, a really important part of our job has to do with confidentiality. And so we don't want anybody's privacy to be interrupted any more than it would have to be because they are part of the criminal justice system. So we really spend most of our time trying to make sure that victims understand what their rights are, and then we go really closely and talk with them about what their needs are. And at a time when victims are experiencing significant trauma, it might be very difficult for them to really just list off all of the things that they need. But there's some similarities with cases that we have, and we know that victims need security and safety, and how do we protect victims against the person who's abused them. So in a circumstance, I'll just use what we typically think about as domestic violence, where we have a female who's abused by a male in their life, and usually we're thinking of sort of a long-term intimate partner. And so we have some tools in our toolkit to help victims who want a protective order. And in our community, we have two organizations, mine and Henderson House, that help victims file petitions for protection. We have 4 different orders that we can apply for, that the victim can apply for, and we can help them through that process, and there's no fee. I think one of the important things is for us to be able to help the community understand that these are not resources that they have to pay for. They wouldn't need a lawyer to get one of these forms, one of these protective orders. So a traditional protective order, what we think about is a restraining order. That is an intimate partner order, so it's somebody, generally we're thinking about spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, that violence there. We also have sexual assault protective order, which is a relatively new order. And that has been the work of communities coming together and saying, hey, we have a sort of a narrow experience here where a victim of sexual violence may not have had a relationship with their abuser, and that they've had, I think we commonly refer to as a date rape, so an acquaintance. And under a traditional protective orders, the victim wouldn't be able to file for something like that. And we have an elder abuse order, which has some very restrictive for folks in the community who are qualify for those. And those, we actually file quite a few protective orders for the elderly population. And those don't have to be sexual or physical violence, but they can also be financial crimes that may be committed against them by, sadly, generally, it is a member of their community. And we also have a stalking protective order. And I think our common language has a lot of jokes around stalking. And we really have to sort of interrupt that comedy about stalking because it's really a very serious crime and really puts victims in fear. And to the most sort of benign way that if you, let's say you worked in an office and your friend Sue gets red roses. And your husband never sent you roses, right? And Sue's suddenly like in a panic. Why did I get roses? And everybody's like, ooh, yay, you got roses, and that's very exciting. Well, just imagine a scenario in which Sue's abuser has said, if you ever get roses for me, you know I'm going to kill you. And so it's sort of hard, and it sounds like a very strange example, but it's true. And we hear very interesting instances in which victims can tell you this means X, Y, and Z, but to be able to explain it to a police officer, I got red roses and I am really afraid. If we didn't do such great work in our community with our law enforcement, and if they weren't so receptive to understanding what those dynamics are, we would be not as successful as we are today in intervening with domestic violence. So let's just talk about Sue for a minute. If she gets those red roses and she calls a police officer, or generally what will happen is they will call an advocate from our office, and we'll be able to work with that victim. We don't have a crime. We don't really have a crime there, right? Because sending somebody isn't a crime, but we have something that has put somebody in fear. So we may be able to help them work through a protective order. We're certainly going to be able to help them with safety planning, and that really encompasses all of the places that a victim will be in a day. So their work employment, their child's school, their faith community, what gym they go to, whatever their life is about, is how do we protect that person. So that is a really significant tool that we have in our community, and we work with those, day in and day out. We have, I wouldn't say that we have more crime than any other community. We certainly see the worst of what we have. And there are times when we start to see some of the best of what we have when communities experience a crime. But certainly for these individuals, most of the people around the community don't know that this crime has been committed against them. And so people can be very isolated. They can be very isolated within their experiences of their abuse. And sometimes having a crime victims office is a place where they can go and really talk about what it is that they're experiencing. We are not counselors, so we don't replace the important work that counselors do in our community. But certainly we have a bit of maybe a safe haven, for lack of a better word, and a place where people feel protected, they feel believed, they feel supported. And so that is what is, to us, the people who work in this field, really find very important, and to be able to validate that those feelings for victims is important. A typical thing that we will be working with victims is helping them to prepare for a resolution of a case. And in the criminal justice system, there's resolutions that might be regarding a plea offer, or it might go into a trial. And victims have a lot more rights now than they used to, so that a prosecutor is required to talk to a victim about a plea offer they may be crafting, and why that makes sense for this crime, for this defendant, for this victim. It may not be the right thing for the victim to go through a trial. And so I think the media tends to either not understand the very intricate details of a criminal justice case, but certainly as you listen to how cases are talked about in the media or on TV shows, it sort of misrepresents what is happening. So victims get to say what they feel about a plea offer. They get to help, in some circumstances, craft what would happen. So I don't want them to go to prison, but I really want to stay safe from them, and I want to keep the protection order in place. I want them to get counseling. Our family is going to reunite. We want them to be a better parent. We want them to be a better spouse. So those are things that we listen to with the victims in these cases. I do want to touch on the work that we do with children. And sadly, we have plenty of cases involving physical and sexual violence against children in our community. And it's always such a pleasure to work with these kids, because their resiliency is amazing to see when they come into our community and into our office. We have a nice soft room, and we have our hands and words are not for hurting pledge poster on the wall. And I'll tell you, I have some fun examples of being out with kids and meeting them in their communities and in their homes and schools, and I'll see little things about the pledge. And I know that I can continue a conversation with those kids about what it means to be safe. This past year, we had a case in which we worked very collaboratively with our nonprofit partners, and it's a pleasure for me to be here with these ladies to talk about this important topic. We had I got called, I think it was a Saturday morning, to go to a home, and detectives were there. They had a mom who was very upset because her daughter had reported sexual violence from boyfriend, live-in boyfriend. And I met the detectives, and I met with the mom, and we were very much at the beginning of a little bit of a journey for these folks. And my job at first is really just to sort of introduce myself and to get that person comfortable in talking about how we're going to help them and what resources we can bring to them and how we're going to sort of surround this family with protections, but also resources. And so this was a very, we have a spectrum, everything has a spectrum. This was a very difficult case for law enforcement to work with because of the particular facts of this case. And we're dealing with a young child who's a victim of some significant, horrific crimes against her, and a mom who had limited resources, maybe some limited social resources, maybe, work employment. There's some really interesting facts patterns with this case because it really goes back to the things that we know about child molesters and how they have access to children, and they can isolate non-offending parent. The mom was the one who worked in the home. The boyfriend became the caretaker. And then, but what happened is the child told the mom, and an amazing miracle is that mom just really believed the kid and immediately got the kid out, got in contact with social services, and then that group helped them shepherd into law enforcement. And so it was a case, and we'll all be talking about it, where we all came together to help this mom and child navigate a system. The individual is in prison, who will be in prison for a long time, but it's a great success story for us to talk about the importance of community-based and system-based working together. Something I want you to understand is in Oregon, the federal government pays more to support victims of crime in Oregon than the state of Oregon does. And so if it wasn't for the federal government, and if it wasn't for community members like you all, we would not have those resources in our community so that we could really advocate very, very efficiently and effectively for this family who needed services from the criminal justice system and who needed services from both Juliette's house and Henderson House. And so it is important for our community to understand, and why I value so much the work we do in Yamhill County, is the collaborative nature, not just with the district attorney's office and all of the law enforcement communities, but of the social networks that we have in place. And day does not go by that we don't reach out to our community partners and say, this is where we can help our victims up to this line. We need to hand you off now into another organization, and the work that we do to help victims understand why this next organization is going to be safe and helpful is really important, and why personally I support both of these organizations and the work that they do. So I think that it is probably my turn now to introduce Savenia from Henderson House, because she is going to be, in my scenario, we worked very closely on this one family and co-advocated for victims in a way that other communities don't do as well as we do in Yamhill County.
Good afternoon. My name is Savenia, and I'm the Executive Director of Henderson House, and have been doing it for about 2 years. I came into Yamhill County because I did some research on the organization, and I could see that there was a need to create some community partnerships and to bridge some gaps and really have wraparound services for our victims and survivors from entry all the way to exit. And so at Henderson House, we really operate off the philosophy that we're honored to have people come into our lives and into our place of employment and work, and that it's a gift for us to engage and to have us reach out to them and find what we can do to support and empower them to be able to fly and be healthy and whole again, and hopefully not go through the cycle of violence again. That's part of our prevention plan. And we need all of our organizations and agencies to be able to really provide that for our families. And sometimes we have to let them fly outside of Yamhill County so that they can restart and become whole and healthy again. Some of the services that we do are primary advocacy, which is engaging families when they are fleeing from domestic violence or sexual assault, or engaged in the system, whatever that may look like. It can be right after an abuse or assault, or it could be 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years later. Our role is to listen, assess, provide services, find other services that will help them go across that bridge, and that includes the primary victim, family members, and also children. We do not serve offenders, we just serve victims. And so primary advocacy is the main thing that we would do. The other piece is we provide support groups. Those are for sexual assault and domestic violence. We do them in Spanish and also in English. And probably, I would say that it takes a good 6 months to a year after there's been the initial advocacy entry before someone is ready to evolve into more of a group setting. But we do have large groups, and so we're very thankful that people are using them. The other things that we do community outreach and presentations like today, and we also provide assistance with cases that come up with the law enforcement. Our role is a little bit different than what Deb was talking about. Her team's very focused on the justice system and the advocacy support. We're more engaged in the community-based aspects of things. So we look at like getting food boxes and all of the support systems that really are needed to help support a family. Let's see, some of the other things we do, it depends on the need when it comes in the door, but a lot of the other things that advocates will be doing is, spending time at our shelter, engaging with women and their children, and finding out what the hot burner is at the time to help them really cool that down so they can move on to the next thing. And we have to work pretty fast. We have a really high demand and limited space and resources, and so we work really hard on the front end to get folks engaged in whatever process that's going to be so that they can be independent and self-sufficient. Our website, hendersonhouse.org, has all the resources, all the listings on them. I would recommend anybody to go and look at that and see what's available and if it applies specific to them or someone they may know. And in regards to the case in common that we're kind of talking about to demonstrate how important each person or staff team, agency's involvement, how important that is. Our particular role was community-based advocacy for both the mother, the non-offending parent, and also the child. And there was also another child involved. But we were just constantly engaging with this person to be able to identify what those needs were, and eventually brought that person into shelter to be able to bridge that little time, because when there's no child care and you're the breadwinner and there's all these different resources that go away, and so we wanted to provide that wraparound support to make sure that the child would stay safe and that the mom would get assistance. There were support groups, counseling offered. One thing about a case like this particular one, where you are a non-offending parent and the boyfriend or partner is grooming and abusing your child, that mother is definitely a secondary or primary victim in that process because she was groomed as well. And so there's a lot of afterwork that has to be done. And I think Juliette's house will talk more about that. But our work was to try to make sure that they have the basic needs and all the stuff available so that they could engage in that longer term process of healing and really identifying ways to protect themselves as a mother and their children. So, as I said, hendersonhouse.org, or you can call, and we're always available to answer questions or just even assess or run through something if you're questioning it. And we hope that you will engage us if you ever find the need. Thank you.
Hi, so my name is Julie Siepmann, and I'm the Clinical Services Director as well as a forensic interviewer at Juliette's house here in McMinnville. And what I'm hoping to do with my time today is spend a little bit of time talking about what Juliette's house is and what we do, and maybe most importantly, why we do it. And then also take a look at the case that Deb and Savenia have also talked about and share with you what Juliette's house role in that case was. And then finally wrap up with a little bit of education in terms of child abuse myths. And as Deb was sort of saying, the way that media currently portrays information about child abuse, about the criminal justice system, that there are a lot of misperceptions out there, and I'm hoping that with my time today I can maybe clear up a few of those. In my role as Clinical Services Director at Juliette's house, I really oversee the assessment process. But I want to take a step back from that and talk a little bit about the different programs that Juliette's house offers. So we offer both prevention programs really designed to, as it says, prevent child abuse from happening in the first place. But we also offer services that really intervene with families when there are concerns that a child may have been physically abused, sexually abused, or may have witnessed domestic violence, all very traumatic experiences for children. On the prevention side of things, we have a team called Safe Kids. And this is a team that goes out into all of the elementary schools in Yamhill County, so all of the towns in Yamhill County, in those elementary schools, our Safe Kids facilitators come in and provide a workshop for the children. The facilitation is done actually in the kids' classrooms. It's not a big assembly. It's in small groups in kids' classrooms. And the way this works is the facilitators use scripted information and do role play to really teach kids about bullying, about inappropriate touch, about stranger awareness. And it really empowers kids to maybe feel able to talk about things that have happened to them that they haven't been able to talk about before. Following the presentation, children are given an opportunity to participate in something called review time. And what this is an opportunity to meet with one of the facilitators one-on-one outside the classroom and talk about anything that the child wants to talk about. Now last year, so in the 2015-2016 school year, Safe Kids facilitators, met with very close to 3,800 students in Yamhill County. Of those students, 46%, so nearly half of them, chose to participate in the review time. Of those children, 31 of those kids talked about issues or problems that they had experienced at home. Of those kids, 21 made reportable child abuse allegations, all of which were reported by the Safe Kids facilitators. And 5 of those reports were reports that had already been made. So law enforcement or Child Protective Services was already aware of those concerns. But in the other 16 cases, these were allegations that had not previously been made. So it feels to us like a very important program in terms of offering children an opportunity to talk about things that are happening in the home that aren't okay. So on the other side, moving away from prevention and talking a little bit about clinical services at Juliette's house, and that's the piece that I'm more closely involved in as a forensic interviewer. The assessment process really is built for concerns, when concerns come up about children having been abused. Juliette's house was started in 1997, and it really, even from the beginning, was a collaborative process. So a group of school counselors, mental health workers, child advocates, folks from law enforcement, folks from Child Protective Services, folks from the DA's office, all got together and really said, we need to create a program to address child abuse in Yamhill County. And so Juliette's House was formed, really modeled after CARES Northwest, which is the big regional child abuse intervention center that's located up in Portland. And at that point, Juliette's House was created and started offering assessments for children where there were concerns of abuse. So the way a child would get referred to Juliette's House is through either law enforcement or Child Protective Services. Occasionally, a physician in town might refer a child and get the referral in that way, but the majority of the referrals do come from Child Protective Services and law enforcement. So if somebody in the community has a concern about abuse, they can contact DHS, Child Protective Services, they can contact law enforcement, and if it's determined that it makes sense for the child to be evaluated at Juliette's House, then they move forward in that process. So once a child is referred, an assessment date is set. The child comes into the assessment with their non-offending parent, and we have a similar policy as Henderson House, and if the alleged offender is someone who is still in the home, they're not invited to participate in the assessment because there's an ongoing investigation. And so once the child is referred, they come in. An average assessment at Juliette's House takes about 3.5 hours. Children usually just come one time. The service that is offered in-house really is the assessment. And following the assessment is when we make referrals to other community agencies. So again, bringing in the importance of collaboration in the work that we're doing. So involving, whether we're involving Henderson House, we're involving the Victims Assistance Office, whether we're pulling in counselors, contacting schools, all of those are important resources for us. What an assessment looks like is we meet initially with the parent, the caregiver who brought the child to Juliette's House, and we gather background medical information, social history information, kind of get a context for what the child's life has looked like, which will help us in understanding the statements that the child makes. Following the history gathering, we allow the parents to go back out to the waiting area. The child then comes back with us, and I work exclusively as a team member. There's nothing that I do in my work at Juliette's House that I do completely alone. And my closest team member is the physician or pediatric nurse practitioner that I happen to be working with on a given day. And that medical provider and I work through the whole assessment completely in tandem. So we both are gathering social history information. The child then moves to a medical exam, which obviously is conducted by the physician or nurse practitioner. And I'm in the room during the exam really to support the child and gain a little rapport with them because I'm going to be interviewing them and I would like them to have a little understanding of who I am, and it helps me to kind of get a sense of how this child talks, what their level of development is, what their level of comfort is at being at Juliette's House. The medical exam at Juliette's House is a head-to-toe well-child check, and I think it's easy for people, when they hear about it, to become concerned that it is more of an intrusive exam than it is, but no more time is spent on any one particular part of the body than another. This is not an internal exam. No part of the exam hurts the child or is physically uncomfortable for the child. And what the doctor does is really helps the child kind of talk about things that they've happened to them by going through each part of the body. And they'll start at the head and ask, has anybody ever hit you in the head or hurt your head or touched your head in a way that made you feel uncomfortable? Really going through the whole body. Have you ever had a black eye? Have you ever had a bloody nose? Has anyone ever choked you? Has anyone ever touched you on your private parts? Has anybody ever kicked you or stomped on your feet? Tell me about spankings. Have you ever had kisses that you felt uncomfortable with? So really kind of going through the gamut, allowing the child to talk about different experiences that they've had. And our partners in law enforcement and Child Protective Services are able to listen in on the exam. There's no visual connection and this is not recorded, but they can hear the child's statements as the child makes them. And I guess I'll kind of step back and explain the reason for having law enforcement and Child Protective Services involved as well through the assessment is that although we all have different roles, we're all working towards the same goal and really needing to have the child's statement made in as detailed and an accurate way as possible. And if we can do that one time for this child and each take what we need from that child's statements in order to make sure the child is safe, the child is healthy, the community is safe, and that the family has a safety plan to kind of move forward with, then we can have the child come one time and do that and not have 3 separate organizations asking this child the same questions about something that's often very difficult for them to talk about. So that's kind of the involvement of the partners during the assessment process as well. So after the medical exam, the child is then transitioned into the forensic interview. That interview is conducted in a room that has a one-way mirror. When I'm the interviewer, it's just me and the child in the room, but on the other side of a one-way mirror is law enforcement and child protective services, as well as the medical person who just did the child's exam, being able to hear the child's statements and watch them as they talk about some of their experiences. And again, the purpose of the interview is really to elicit as much of that information in the most neutral and non-leading way as possible and allow the child to have a chance to talk about what their experiences have been. And we think that it can be very cathartic for children to have that opportunity, even though it can also be stressful for children to come in and talk about some of these experiences. In many cases, children have been told not to tell, have been threatened not to tell, and so getting to a point where they feel comfortable being able to let go of some of these heavy secrets that they've been carrying around can be a difficult journey for them. But we often hear from children and from families that the children are leaving feeling a little lighter, some relief of having left some of their burden, the secret and the shame kind of behind them as they move forward from it. So following the child's interview, they're transitioned back out to the waiting area. Our family support team, which is comprised of interns as well as a family support team coordinator, is supporting the family through this whole process. And the children are in the playroom with one of our interns who's supporting them and kind of keeping them entertained, as well as support for the families as they're going through this. And when the child is finished with the interview, they come back out and to the playroom, and we bring the parents back in to talk about recommendations and give them information about follow-up and what to do and where to go from there. And often we're recommending counseling for the child, counseling for family members. As Savenia had mentioned, the tremendous stress on families as well in these situations and making sure we're supporting the whole family through this process. We may make referrals to Henderson House for some of their groups and support groups and helping the families get other needs met if they need food, if they need housing, if they have other needs in the community that Henderson House can help them access, then we make that referral as well. Certainly, many of our children who are impacted by physical abuse or sexual abuse are also impacted by domestic violence. There's a lot of research that shows that kids who are in homes where there's domestic violence are at much higher risk for being physically abused or sexually abused. So we really see that link, and again, that partnership becomes very important because those aren't the services we offer, but we can partner with them, and they have those services. And likewise with victims' assistance as they're moving forward, and some of these cases are going to trial, and the families are having to interact with the legal system in a way they never have before and don't know the system and are struggling to navigate that, that the Victims Assistance Office is able to really provide that support for restraining orders, as Deb had mentioned, are all really important resources that we know that they will be served well in these other places. So that kind of is a typical assessment at Juliette's house and kind of an overview of what it is that we do at Juliette's house. And I get asked not infrequently why it is that I do what I do. It isn't easy work, but it's certainly very meaningful work for me. And Deb said very well, really something that resonated with me in terms of really being able to witness the resilience of children, I think is one of the most remarkable things about the work that I do. And seeing children who are able to come to Juliette's house and talk about some pretty horrific things, but our kids who are still able to smile and play and connect with people is truly remarkable. And it's those moments that give you hope that you can perhaps intervene in a moment in a child's life or in a family's life in a way that might change that pattern and help these families move on to be safer and maybe reduce the vulnerability of both the family as well as the children. But there are barriers as well to being successful in this type of work, and Savenia also touched on that in terms of the multiple issues that are often facing our families. It's very rare for us to have a family that comes in with just one concern. In terms of the only struggle the family's having is the abuse that happened to the child. And while that's horrible in itself, many of these families are also dealing with substance abuse issues, issues of housing, with issues of financing, with issues of childcare. And so the needs are tremendous. So again, kind of knowing where in the community these families can be assisted is incredibly important. We don't work at all in a vacuum. We have our one piece, but it's a piece of a larger puzzle. So in terms of, that's kind of in a general way, a general overview of what it is that we're doing at Juliette's House, and I want to kind of focus in a little bit now on the case that we had in common, and I'll just tell you a little bit about what our role was working with this family. So this little girl was 7.5 years old, and she was referred to Juliette's House as was mentioned previously when she made statements that Mom's boyfriend had been abusing her. And again, the fact that she felt comfortable telling her mom at some point, initially what she had said was she didn't want him babysitting her anymore. And didn't really tell Mom why, but Mom heard that and actually found alternate care for her. And I think partly because of that, because Mom believed her and Mom did something about what she said, she felt more comfortable actually saying why it was that she didn't want him looking after her, which was because the abuse was happening when Mom was working and he was her primary caregiver. After she made the disclosure to Mom, Mom kicked the boyfriend out immediately and was able to then make a police report. When Mom kicked him out, he did confess to her that there was one incident, one time, when he had touched this child inappropriately. So in time, the police then had an opportunity to interview him. And during that interview, he actually disclosed numerous times that he had abused this child. And we had information from his confession before talking to the child. And that's a very unusual situation to have that much information, but we understood some of the things that had happened to her based on his confession. So when she came to Juliette's house, all the things that I explained earlier kind of happened. She went through all of those pieces. During the medical exam, she had her head-to-toe checkup. In her case, there were physical findings, and I didn't mean to say, kind of in a general sense, the vast majority of the time, there are no physical findings in child abuse cases. It's very unusual for there to be anything physically that sort of says that this happened to a child, and that nearly all the time it comes down to the child's statements in order to kind of explain what the situation was. That the physical findings are very rare. In this situation, there were some physical findings. It was impossible to say exactly what they were caused by, but obviously they were concerning and validated the statements that had been made previously. During this little girl's interview, she disclosed some of the abuse, but not all of the abuse, which again is very common for children. When they start disclosing, they don't usually tell the whole story all at once. They give bits and pieces. And then over time, eventually, most of the story can come out. But she was able to tell us some of the things that had happened. And we met with Mom afterwards, had recommended counseling immediately for this child, had recommended counseling for Mom. Mom was a victim of abuse herself, and again, that's not an uncommon dynamic that we see, and it makes it even more difficult for parents going through the process if they've had past experiences that are coming up for them while they're trying to support their child through this. So there were issues that were brought up in the social history gathering in this child's life that we hadn't known about beforehand. This child had witnessed domestic violence on numerous occasions with Mom and previous partners. This little girl was struggling significantly at school. The school was very concerned about behaviors that had started around the time that the abuse had started. And obviously at the time, Mom didn't know why this little girl was struggling at school. Mom had some mental health issues of her own. Again, the finances were a significant issue for her. So all of these kind of coming up as concerns, and figuring out how we're going to meet all those needs becomes fairly challenging. But in the end, again, we were able to collaborate with our community partners. The detectives did a great job and were able to build a case, and as Deb said, he was convicted and will be in prison for a long time, which means that other children are safe from him, but this family is still going to need ongoing support. I got a call from the school even a couple weeks ago saying, how can we support this family? This little girl's still struggling. The mom calls Juliette's house pretty much every week still to seek support, the sense being that she doesn't have a lot of support apart from a single family member who has been there for her, but kind of talking about how hard it is to parent a traumatized child. This mom is also pregnant with this ex-boyfriend who's now in prison's baby, and that's a complicating factor, obviously, in a lot of ways, in terms of mom having 2 kids to support, but in terms of mom's own kind of psychological kind of well-being around that particular issue. So there are still some unresolved issues, but there were numerous issues that were able to be met and are still being met now, even months down the line after this had happened. I want to spend just the last couple minutes of my time hopefully dispelling a few child abuse myths, misperceptions that are out there about child abuse. So the first one really is that there's a particular group of people who are susceptible, that child abuse really only happens in one sector of society. And I think it's really important to understand that child abuse impacts every socioeconomic level, every race, every culture in a community. It is not an issue that is particular to one group within a community. I think that another thing that people often think is that a child who has been abused is going to then hate their abuser or not want to be with that person. And it's not uncommon that I hear a defense attorney in court when I'm on the stand as a witness to the child's statements saying, this child wasn't afraid of him. This child still wanted him to come kiss her goodnight. He still wanted her to, she still wanted him to kiss her goodnight. She still wanted to play with him. And how can that be if he actually abused her? And I think people have to understand that child abuse is an incredibly complicated dynamic, and children don't necessarily hate their abuser. They really want the abuse to stop. But I think I've had parents say that as well, that I would know if my child was being abused but I know that she's not, because she still likes to be around this person and seeks out his attention. And then another thing that parents often feel is that, well, my child would tell me. My child would tell me if they were being abused, and what we know is that most kids don't. Most kids don't tell. And the kids that do tell often wait to tell, maybe days or months or even years after the abuse has happened, because these perpetrators are very manipulative and very successful in getting kids to keep their secrets. I'm going to cheat and look at a couple other myths that I wanted to bring up. Another one is that most physical abuse is perpetrated by men, perpetrated by fathers, and really the research shows that men and women are equally likely to commit physical abuse to their children. And another one is children who disclose abuse but then later say, oh, it didn't happen, really were probably lying in the first place. And again, what we know is that children who aren't believed or supported after they make a disclosure of abuse very commonly will recant, will take their story back. But it's a common dynamic for kids who aren't being supported and who aren't being believed. And so in the vast majority of those situations, the child was telling the truth in the first place, but because of the reaction they got to their disclosure, they took it back. And another is that children are very suggestible and easily make up stories of abuse. And that simply is not the case in terms of the research that's been done. It's a common idea out there that for whatever reason, if a parent is coaching them or the child is angry at a parent and makes this disclosure, but really when we're getting kids' statements, we're asking them details and specifics. And a child who's been told what to say or is making up a story isn't able to provide sensory detail, isn't able to say how they were feeling, what they were thinking at the time, what they could smell, what was playing on the radio or on the TV in the background, that those details lend significant credibility to a child's story. And really, again, the research bears out that children are not making up stories of abuse. I think finally, there's an idea that children who have disabilities are really less vulnerable than children who don't have disabilities, but in fact, children with disabilities are 3.5 more times likely to be abused than kids who don't have disability because they're particularly vulnerable and maybe don't have such I shouldn't say an easy time, but it's much harder for them to articulate what's happening to them and to talk about their experiences. And they're a special population within an already vulnerable population that really needs special attention and special protection. On that note, I'm going to wrap up, but I guess again, I really feel like it's incredibly important to help the community understand what resources are out there to address domestic violence, to address child abuse, and as well as what resources are available navigating the criminal justice system. And in terms of what community members can do, I think being educated is an incredibly important piece of it. Sometimes you may find yourself interacting with a child that you think maybe was abused, and having some information about that is very helpful in knowing what to do about it. Or maybe you're interacting with a parent who's afraid their child was abused, or maybe you're on a jury and it's a child abuse case, and having just some of that background information allows you to really think about the facts of the case in a fairly different way. But again, I think the most important piece of my work is the collaboration, both within Juliette's House as part of my assessment team, but in a broader sense, working with the detectives, with child protective service workers, with folks at the other nonprofits, with Lutheran Family Services, with Family and Youth, with the Victims Assistance Office, and with Henderson House as well, that collaboration makes for a strong community, and I feel like it really is what's essential in terms of really protecting the vulnerable people in our population, many of whom are women and children. So, thank you.
Hi, my name is Gretchen Olson. I am here today with the Evergreen Aviation and Peace Valley School speaker series, and it's the one today is #Yes All Women. We've just finished, and I have really enjoyed it, hearing from the various representatives from our community who protect children and women and help them heal. I'm also a member of Seroptimus International of McMinnville, Oregon, an organization that helps to improve the lives of women and children and help them become all they can possibly be. And within that organization, I am a co-chair of the Hands and Words Are Not for Hurting organization. And that organization also is a preventative and intervention program and healing program to address all forms of abuse and violence. And I just want to say that this has been an extremely wonderful presentation today, and I look forward to the rest of this series.
The message tonight was about unity, about a community working together to make the world a better and safer place. And that is the mission of Peace Valley School, where we learn by working together to make the world better.